Hi, my name is Casey Hersch. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, author, and founder of LightYourSparkle.life. Today, I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Roy. He specializes in a technique called Nambudripad's Allergy Elimination Technique, also known as NAET or NAET. Many of you have heard me talk about this technique. I write about it, and I am so fond of the technique for so many reasons. I credit NAET for being the reason why I'm still here today, that I'm alive, and that I've been able to cope with chronic autoimmune illness, Crohn's disease, as well as I've been able to cope with it. So I'm excited to talk to Dr. Roy about the technique. His mother, Dr. Devis, developed the technique, and it is now done worldwide. He has a clinic, OC Integrative Medicine, which is the global headquarters for NAET. And NAET is a revolutionary technique that uses principles of acupuncture and Chinese medicine to treat food and environmental allergies and sensitivities. And we'll talk more about what that means in terms of sometimes our cognitive constructs around allergies. It's much broader than that. It is a form of energy medicine that balances the body when there's a weakness. And let's just get this started and start asking Dr. Roy some questions. Hello, Dr. Roy.
Hi, Casey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So can you just give us an overview of NAET?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you pretty much hit it right there. It's generally what it is. My mom started this more than 30 years ago now. I think in 1983 or 84 is when she kind of got the idea of this. It all started from her desperation to seek help for her own health issues as well as my issues as a child. She had tried, especially for me, many things in the medical mainstream sort of world, and nothing was really sort of helping. And she even tried chiropractic, acupuncture, herbs. Nothing really gave her that sort of result. But once she combined certain aspects of these things into her own sort of formulation, sort of kind of playing around and experimenting, she finally found something that helped her as well as myself. And that's kind of the start of it. For the first year or so, she was working out of her house, actually, or my childhood home. And she just started seeing lots of patients getting better and better. So it started avalanching and evolving. And now it's sort of in a form that's quite different than when it first started, but it's more effective. And we're still doing research to try to get it more effective. But yeah, it's generally acupressure, I would say, and sort of manipulation, non-invasive, so you do not have to have needles or any kind of invasive procedures. And with that sort of non-invasive technique, we still get really amazing results. As you said, we've even seen cancer go into remission. We've had autoimmune diseases get better with labs. I've had my own patients with lupus, for example, and numerous patients with lupus. Their labs improve on blood work actually with NAT alone. We have a tremendous amount of patients with what we call emotional issues, which it's not the standard emotions, but it's more like psychological connections between foods or items and your body. And we delve into that and break that connection through our technique. So it kind of helps those people. So yeah, I mean, unless it's like a trauma, like you're stabbed in the heart with a knife or something, and NAT was not going to help with that, of course. But pretty much everything else you can think of, NAT, especially for chronic illness, NAT is a really good go-to method. Some of the downsides to it is that it takes a long time sometimes, especially if you have a lot of complicated issues. And in some cases, it's very, time intensive, and there's a process you have to go through where the patients have to be given homework, so to speak. It's not like you just take a pill, you go to the doctor's office, take a pill, and you're done. You actually have to do sort of lifestyle changes and self-balancing procedures. It's quite intense that way. But other than that, for those who are not, keen towards using medications or surgeries, want to look for any other avenue to help them, this would be a great option.
Definitely. And what you're saying is that it's non-invasive.
Yes.
It does take a commitment by the patient, because
Yes,
with a lot of
absolutely.
alternative techniques, you're not taking a pill. And so medication can give us results quickly, but not always
Yes.
get to the root issues.
Yes, exactly. Right.
So there is some commitment that has to come from the patient. And if I
Yeah.
recall, it has to do with certain dietary, avoiding certain things that they may or may not be able to eat for a period of, say, 24 hours. And
Yes, also there's self-balancing procedures we call gates in acupressure, where you sometimes have to treat your own gates, especially, for example, patients who have very very severe allergies. They need a lot of prep work, and to get themselves better. And so there's a lot of sort of homework that the patient will have to do at home. So it's quite a different process. When you go to a doctor, typically you think, okay, you're just going to give me something and my problem's going to go away. In this case, it's more like a therapy program. And you have to sort of be, as you said, committed and willing to do the work as well. But in some cases, it's actually quite easy. Patients get better really fast, especially if they have very minor issues. Believe it or not, many of the autoimmune diseases like lupus, for example, is a great example, actually are a bit easier to treat than severe life-threatening allergies, for example, like anaphylaxis. So it kind of there's different sort of variations of disease, and it depends on who you are. But in most cases, it does require sort of an involvement by the patient and the family.
you said that there's sometimes emotional triggers. So can you talk a little bit? I think we have this idea of what an allergy is. And I think most of us think allergies are, I've got a stuffy nose. We may
Right.
not connect an allergy or a food sensitivity to a serious condition like lupus or Crohn's disease, or even, as you said, you've had some patients with cancer, you've seen them go into remission. Can you expand what that allergy term actually means?
Yeah, so I mean, the word allergy is very common use, so everyone understands that. That's why we use that word. It's like a sort of an English word that we have in our vocabulary. But I guess a better way if I were to reterm it, would be a reaction, maybe, because that's a more general statement. So like you could have, for example, let's say I'm driving down a freeway in my car and I'm eating an apple at the same time, and suddenly I get in a car accident, and then the next day everything's fine, and the next day I eat the same apple again and I get a headache. And then I notice that maybe the headache goes away, and a month later I eat an apple again and the headache comes back. So every time I eat an apple, a headache comes on. So that's a very simplistic example of a reaction, quote unquote, where we could call that an allergy. Basically, you're sort of developing an allergy to apples because you had that car accident and your mind somehow connects those two. And that's the emotion part that I'm talking about. And what we do is we try to break that emotional connection so that when you eat the apple, you taste the sweetness of it or the tartness of it, the smell of it, et cetera. And then it brings you back to that time and place or whatever. If you can sort of break that, and you do not have the headaches anymore, so the alternative would be to go to a neurologist, get all the medications or have any kind of procedures to get rid of the headaches. But if you figure out that the apple was sort of the connection with that car accident and you break that cycle, then you don't need any of that. That's the key.
And what a phenomenal result
Yeah,
because I mean, finding that information, if you went to conventional medicine, you would be going down this road that
definitely.
would open up a lot of doors that on the surface might seem like, okay, I'm going the right way, and maybe there are some solutions to that, but they would never recognize that at the core was this emotional connection to the incident that happened while you were eating the apple.
Yeah, so that is sort of one of the sort of aha moments that my mom came up with that I'm surprised, to be honest with you, Casey, that no one has thought of until now, really, until her. I can't think of anyone who has come up with that specific type of connection until then. Um, I mean, you hear about Pavlov's dog, and there's all these different sort of psychological experiments out there that people have with ringing the bell, causing salivation or whatever. But no one ever, for whatever reason, in medicine, connected the dots in that way. And more importantly, actually, is even if you did connect the dots, you don't know how to treat that. You would not know how to. You just talk about it, and talking about it doesn't help. That's the other thing that we found is that. So in some ways, psychotherapy, even though it may be helpful for many people, in this situation, it may not necessarily be helpful. It'll just bring on the headache, actually, to be honest with you. So there's a deeper physiological mechanism, I think, involved, and that's where the NAT acupressure and back treatment with the spine manipulation is involved. It's something neurological that when you do that in massage, it sort of alleviates that connection. That's kind of what that's my hypothesis on it anyway.
And I completely agree with you, Dr. Roy, because I'm a therapist, and I have to say that even though the core training in psychotherapy has been to talk about emotions and talk about trauma, you cannot get far with just talking. In some situations, I'm not saying that it's not therapeutic and it doesn't help people build relationships and build resources and resiliency, but these emotional incidents can literally become trapped in the body and in the memory of the nervous system. And
Yes.
talking about it doesn't access it, and it can also further embed it as a trauma or some emotional incident.
Right.
So I love that NAET is a body technique that actually, without having the narrative, it can make those connections through the muscle testing, and a person can be free because there's an integration that happens back between the mind and the body.
Yes, absolutely.
Didn't exist before.
That's correct. So that's the key. That's like one of the biggest aspects of NAT that's invaluable. That in other words, it cannot be. I have not seen any other technique produce that kind of result. With standard allergies like anaphylaxis, there are other techniques out there like immunotherapy and drugs that you can use to sort of calm the symptoms down. But with an emotional situation like this, there's no drug on earth. I don't think there ever will be that can get rid of that connection. I mean, that is a fundamental sort of piece of your life that happened. It doesn't make sense that a pill would get rid of that.
Yeah, I think about people with Crohn's disease like myself and so-called leaky gut. Now, with Crohn's disease, I've had a history of a lot of food allergies. Now, I find it really interesting because when I was a child, I had a really traumatic home. There was lots of events in my life that were really scary, where I felt very vulnerable and defenseless. And most of those events happened while I was also eating.
Yeah.
So there is a very strong likelihood, I believe, that, I'd be eating dinner and maybe my father would yell at me. Maybe he would swing his hand across the table and throw food. Who knows? And here I am eating a variety of food items, and that connection can easily be made to the food as being a form of a threat because it's now connected to the threatening incident.
Yes.
So I just wonder myself as I look at my life if a lot of the food allergies that manifested in my body were also connected to the emotional events that were happening while I was eating. And then I developed what looked like, a really severe food allergy to so many different items. But when I started doing NAET, I will say the severity of my symptoms by just going through the basic 15 treatments that are usually considered the core of the treatment approach, that a lot of the bleeding and the really severe symptoms I was having, they went away.
Yeah, and in autoimmunity in general, we do see a strong emotional connection. So even with those patients with lupus, as I said, for example, or even ulcerative colitis, as you said, Crohn's, many of those patients do have a lot of emotional connections. We do find that. Also in thyroid disease, so hypothyroidism, autoimmune type especially, oftentimes those patients will have fears that have sort of, that'll bring the onset of that illness. So we do see that connection. What's interesting though is not everyone gets that. So for example, there may be another person in Casey's exact situation whose father was swinging the arm, etc., in childhood, but for whatever reason, that person did not develop these symptoms. So that's the other thing about NAET is that I often think about this because when I go to the bookstores and I see all these newer books coming out, everyone gives like their formula of like, the main thing that's causing all illness today, right? Like, celiac or lectins or whatever the case may be. But the thing is, there is no single bullet like that. That's the point. And NAT proves that, which is each person is individual. So, one person's experience is what causes their illness, and another person, it's something else, so it's very unique to each person. And I think that's the other reason why I believe in NAT so much, is because the model fits illness so well. It can explain, for example, why some children develop autism with vaccines, maybe, and other children who have the same exact vaccine formula do not develop autism. And so when you do a research study comparing those children, the research study may say that the vaccines are irrelevant, right? Because both, one child did not develop autism, the other one did, but they don't bring in that allergy concept. So if you say, okay, all the children who are not allergic to vaccines then get the vaccines, then you would reduce the amount of autism. Whereas if you can identify which patients are allergic to the vaccines and make sure they do not get them, that's a better way of it's sort of like personalized medicine, basically. And I think that's why this is so great, because it really, to this point, has not failed that model. When a patient, the hardest part about it though is getting to that answer. So when I said about the car accident and the apple, that, if once you can get to that point and you figure out that is the issue, that's great. But that's a really hard thing to do. Finding that specific trigger, that's the most difficult thing about NAT.
Well, I love what you're saying about how it's personalized medicine, because part of the problem I've had forever, and part of the reason why I'm so passionate about doing interviews like this and writing a book, because patients can often not feel empowered over their own health condition. And there can be this idea that there's a one size fits all.
Right.
And I know like the latest and greatest are a lot of these elimination diets, and people are advocating for, okay, if you have Crohn's disease or you have Hashimoto's or any other condition, there's a diet that's supposed to fix the problem. And in my experience, I eat certain items that someone else who has Crohn's disease would not eat. I also don't eat a lot of items that are recommended in a lot of these protocols.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so as you said, it's very personalized and it's very unique to each person. So no two, let's say in this case, Crohn's disease, no two patients are alike. Even with Crohn's disease itself, there's such variation. So I think that's where NAT is really has a head start, because we're already thinking in that terms. Whereas if you go to a standard physician, as you said, it's oftentimes a one size fits for all. That's a really good way of saying it.
And a person might try a certain diet that is recommended, maybe the FODMAPs diet, or there's a ketogenic diet, whatever a person may feel is the fit for them. And there are certain foods on there that they may start to get sicker and not understand why they're getting more and more sick. The reality is they've got some kind of allergy to it, or maybe this emotional connection. So their best intentions can be to try this diet that's highly recommended. And then all of a sudden they're worse. And then that just creates a loop. I feel like doing the NAET has helped me give answers about my body that helped me not have to get stuck in that cycle of illness. It's really hard when you're, doing rotation diets and you've got your lists of on Monday I eat this and Wednesday I eat this. And then it is so crazy making for someone who already doesn't feel well.
What I would say for patients or listeners out there, one thing to keep in mind too is a good test. This may not be 100%, okay, but sometimes I do tell my patients a good test for you to see if NAT might help you is to do a very broad elimination diet for maybe a few weeks and see if you feel any changes, good or bad. If you have some changes that occur with that elimination diet, then it means something is going on with your diet. It doesn't mean that you have to continue on that diet forever. of course, then at that point you go do NAET or whatever. But the point is that it sort of can tell you, like, okay, there's not a tumor growing in my stomach, and that's why I'm having this. There's something related to my environment that I can control. So it gives patients that empowering feeling that they can control what their outcome, and it's just up to them to do the hard work to figure that out and spend time and all that. But that's sort of something that people can do just by listening to the show right now, that maybe can help them clue into, hey, maybe my life is not destined to be like X, Y, and Z, and I can do something to change it.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't have to entertain the worst possibilities. I think fear, when people have chronic conditions, fear can be immobilizing. So being able to
Yeah.
do something that you can do on your day, in a day-to-day basis, that is yours, you can control that. It's not super high demanding, because when you say, a broad elimination diet, it's not every single thing that you're eating, so then you're feeling nutritionally deprived. You can pick and choose, okay, yeah, maybe I'll eliminate gluten for a week,
Right.
several weeks, or some of the top allergens, and then listen to my body and see how I respond.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it may be that some of the underlying issues are less serious than the symptoms feel like.
Correct. Yeah, so that's it's like a stratified approach, where you're sort of getting to the trigger. And that's definitely, if people are all doing that, then that already tells you that a pill or a surgery is not going to get rid of this. And it's something sort of involved in the diet or environment that you have to go after. And really, that's where NAET is, in terms of the treatment part, NAET is really good at addressing that. As I said, the key thing is getting to that actual trigger. That's the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, and I think that, so a lot of therapists, because we work with trauma and we're trained to work with trauma, when we hear someone mention, oh, there's an emotional component, I feel like, the general response is, oh, but we're not supposed to, work with emotions unless we're trained as therapists. And I just want to clarify that NAET does not delve into the narrative of a story. It's not if an emotional connection comes up, it's not something that's asking the client to then divulge the story about everything and
Correct.
to
Yes.
go into a processing of it. This is something that's done with the body, and it's not done through a reenactment, so to speak, of the trauma.
That's correct. The only thing is you just want to find out what the trauma is, generally speaking, that caused the issue. Once you get to that point, in fact, in a standard NAET practitioner's office, if they're doing it correctly and not mixing it with other techniques, you pretty much, the practitioner does not even talk about it. You would just be, doing it yourself, sort of with the practitioner guiding you through that treatment, the back treatment process. So yeah, the only thing that the practitioner might want to know is, was it the car accident that led to the apple issue, or was it, dad yelling at you, et cetera. You just want to know generally what it was. And then once you figure that out, in these cases where there is an emotional connection, that is, and then the next steps are very non-invasive. We don't get involved at all in terms of the story, as you said, but it is good to just have that idea of what could be causing it so you can treat it.
Exactly. So there's been an increase in autoimmune illnesses. I feel like, we've now reached an epidemic, and I was reading an article not too long ago that talked about chronic illness being on the rise in millennials. And when you talk about like triggers, it's not just food, right? I mean, there's environmental, there's radiation, there's other
Yes.
toxins that we come
Absolutely.
in contact with,
Right.
chemicals, things that we put on our body.
Yes.
Do you feel like that is part of the reason that we're having so much more exposure to so many things that we're not used to and we're maybe meant to be exposed to in, our ancestors' time? Is that possibly some of the reason why we're seeing a large rise in autoimmune, and we're now seeing the younger generation, the millennials, starting to take on autoimmune illnesses and other serious conditions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know the answer, to be honest with you, Casey, but I can hazard a guess and say that I think you're correct in that all these newer chemicals, newer, newer devices that we're seeing all the time. We have our cell phone with us when we sleep, et cetera, all this kind of stuff going on. Even the air is filled with radio waves and all this, the 5G, 4G network stuff. All that radiation could be definitely a component. It would be interesting to see, I guess, like in third world countries where they don't have as many chemicals or radiation, what the sort of rates of chronic illness would be in their millennials, quote unquote, is. I guess I would think that it's less than in the United States. So if that's the case, then yeah, it would have to be that. But I think also another big part of it, as we were just talking about, is the emotional issues too. I think as we get more isolated, especially during coronavirus time and all this stuff, there's going to be a lot more of these types of issues where people are not able to sort of deal with these traumas that happen with them. And you're going to see more and more percentage of people are going to be associating those emotions with things that they eat or drink or touch, just because they don't have another outlet, actually. That's just a guess on my part. I'm not sure if it'll happen. I hope not. But it would make sense to me. And so if that's the case, then unfortunately, that's going to be a huge harm to our society, and people will need NAT or something to get out of that. I don't see any other way.
I just have to say that your mom, Dr. Devi, I think has more credentials and education than anyone that I had ever come in contact with. And I'm bringing that up because I feel like a lot of times there's techniques that are out there that people don't realize, especially something like NAET. There was a lot of education and research and knowledge going into the development of this.
Yes, absolutely. She went to medical school, chiropractic school, and acupuncture school, all three. But really, the genius of it came from her hard work and her unrelenting spirit is the way I describe it. Basically, she, when as I said, when I was young and when she was going through issues, she tried all kinds of things. And the key was that she did not think of herself as being crazy. She just was kind of in this mode as, I'm going to just go on to the next thing if it doesn't work. That kind of attitude. And regardless of how nuts you would think it is, I remember she tried all kinds of stuff with mirrors and using a bunch of garlic all the time and all kinds of stuff. And she, you name it, she's tried it. And really what it comes down to is this technique was what she sort of stumbled upon. I think that's really the key. The education, of course, helped her fine tune it. But yeah, absolutely. I think, my hope is that as time goes on, history will look more favorably upon NAT and more people will accept this. In fact, what's funny, Casey, is my mom used to always call this people's medicine. Her way she would call this people's medicine, because her goal actually was to train every single citizen of the United States. Kind of like email, how the email destroyed the postal industry, basically. She's hoping that NAT will destroy the medical industry and that everyone will just get cured of their illnesses, won't need a doctor or hospital or anything. That's kind of her really super fantasy. But yeah, that's kind of that's the perspective that she came with. She was trying to get something that would be very easy and very, as I said, non-invasive and very effective for everyone to use. And that's kind of why she, I think, got to this.
I love it. So much heart, and that's what it takes. And you mentioned something about COVID-19 a few minutes ago that it just kind of took my breath away, and I had to wait for a couple seconds to go back to it, because you are the first medical doctor, because you're an MD yourself, correct?
Yes, correct.
You're the first medical doctor that I have spoken to or even heard who has made such a profound connection, as you just did, between illness and what's happening with the changes in our times right now as people are isolating at home. They're not connecting with their normal day-to-day outlets. They're not even seeing the familiar faces of loved ones and friends.
Yeah.
And for a long time, we haven't been able to do that. And it just speaks to the importance that nothing is merely physical. There's an emotional and physical component to illness, and we have to be integrative and not one-dimensional, and just focus on, while there is a virus that's real and we know that
Yeah.
it requires proaction, we have to also hold that with the reality that there's an
Yes.
emotional illness that can result from people not being able to connect in the way that they're used to. And that can also drive illness and conditions. And even just historically, with how we have become more disconnected
Yeah,
with
exactly.
more
Right.
technology and cell phones, and we're not
Right.
having as much face to face, just in general as a
Right.
society,
Yes.
because the times have changed even
Yep.
before the COVID.
That's right.
There's a loss still, this wired tendency that we have to need connection with humans, and especially a face to face
Yes.
situation.
Right. So that's, so this is all happening on a background, as you said, of already social isolation. I mean, people are using Facebook or whatever, Instagram, instead of going to, meet their neighbors, basically. There are a lot of neighborhoods out there where I'm sure the neighbors don't even know each other. So, I mean, that's very different from like the 80s and the 70s when I kind of grew up. I used to know my neighbors really well. We would go and play with each other all the time, et cetera. That has changed dramatically, I would say, since 2000. So, if funny as you said, the millennials, I think the millennial generation is part of that. They don't even, I don't think they even understand that concept of sort of gathering with friends, basically your neighborhood, in many areas. So that already sort of puts them at risk for depression, anxiety, all kinds of things, but even allergies as well, because they're not getting addressed or having all these traumatic connections. But then COVID hits and it's going to get worse. I did actually just hear though that I think the American Association of Pediatrics just put out a strong statement, sort of strongly recommending that kids go to school in the fall, especially the younger children, because they're saying that despite the risks of the COVID, the risk of isolation for children is much greater. And I agree with that 100%. I think, there's nothing worse than having our young generation of kids, become messed up as they grow up from this. So that I agree with that. And I agree with generally, as you said, balancing, risk of the COVID with making sure that you get, sort of social care.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very well said. And it just speaks to the fact that we are humans and we are full of many dimensions to
Yes. Right.
ourselves. And I
Yeah.
know without question that the relapse that I had with my own Crohn's disease happened during the last 3 months. And I've had to take a strong look at, why was I stable? And then why did I have such a hard relapse during the coronavirus stuff? Well, it
Mhm.
definitely activated my own fear. I have a history of trauma. Lots of fear got activated. And I suspect that the food allergies and my reactivity in general has become a lot more heightened, because when my fear system gets heightened, so does the rest of my system in my body.
Yes.
I start reacting and fighting and defending myself and protecting myself in all these different ways that are
Right.
outside of my control.
Yeah.
So I have to always be mindful and make that connection. And I absolutely love that NAET is a tool that people can use to be able to unhook those connections and
Right.
have improvement in their health fairly quickly if they are willing to make the commitment to their health. And we know healing it's a lifelong process, really, to
Yes.
have health. And we're constantly coming into contact with new things, and so healing is a lifelong commitment. But it's really important to have something like NAET to help you get a strong foundation and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think unhooking the emotions, that's a good way of saying it. And I think NAT is one of the only techniques I can think of that does that remarkably well.
Now, for people people are really afraid of getting COVID. Some people, have had it. So
Hmm.
I like to look at NAT as a way to boost the immune system. I mean, just even in
Yes.
my own mind, I think of how much disease can be prevented if we
Yes. Hmm.
boost our immune system and keep a strong base.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that, Dr. Roy, in terms of the coronavirus and boosting the immune system?
Yeah, absolutely. I do 100% believe that NAT is a tool to use to help people get through the situation, either to help them maybe prevent getting it or to get them through it. I, of course, would completely agree with, washing hands. That's the most important thing, by the way. The masks actually are actually not as important, in my opinion, as washing hands. So I've seen many, many cases where people are wearing masks at a restaurant, for example, and they'll be touching their face and their mask all the whole time. That's pointless. It doesn't do anything. It actually makes it worse. So the most important thing is always knowing where your hands are. That's a really hard thing to do, but that's the number one thing. But of course, if you get really good sleep, and also mindful meditation is also really helpful, especially breathing exercises, helping your lung capacity. That's a very underrated thing. These are things that are not necessarily part of NAET, but these are just my opinion on things to do for your listeners out there that they can do right now without having to go see an NAET practitioner. But increasing their lung capacity by breathing exercises is another huge, huge thing, because in our philosophy as well, when the lung capacity increases, your immune system actually gets boosted as well. And then on top of that, if let's say you were to get COVID-19, you would be more able to deal with that, with having a larger lung capacity. So that's a really good thing. But of course, as we're talking about NAET, that is the 15, 17 basics, as you mentioned. Those are really, really key as well. And that's something that your listeners or patients can go to when they go to their practitioners. They can go through that process. And doing that process itself would dramatically help them. In fact, a lot of those patients will feel that their sleep improves during that process. They feel just lighter, like a happier feeling oftentimes. Those are all signs that your immune system is actually going to get better. And as you said, it is no overnight deal. It definitely does take time. But if you were to expect an overnight process, you're really not thinking of it realistically. I mean, this is a therapy. I mean, if you're especially for an adult with a lot of complications, it took you a long time to get there. You're going to have to put in the commitment to put time to get better.
Yeah, I think we've gotten used to putting a Band-Aid on symptoms just to survive and to cope with what's happening in the immediate, instead of looking at the bigger picture. And I feel pretty blessed that at this point in my life with Crohn's disease, I still have all my organs intact. And that I feel that's quite remarkable. And I try to look at healing as not just immediate gratification, but long term. I want to increase the longevity of my body to be able to dance and do the things that I love. And that's an investment in me. And I think just in terms, sometimes we get focused on how much things cost, and that's easy to do because it's not inexpensive to, afford treatments and do things. But NAET is so inexpensive when you look at the gains that you have long term. And also when you look at the potential to eliminate some of the pharmaceutical drugs that are also expensive but also have side effects. So I think just always looking at both sides is important when you're making a decision.
Yeah, and that's actually my Dr. Devi, and my focus at this point in time is to do research, solid research, to prove to like insurance companies or the governments out there that NAET is sort of a valid option, number one, and number two, to support it by means of insurance or what have you. And so once we get to that point, then I think a lot of the patients would have more access to this, of course. But even then, despite that, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you try to go for instant gratification, which a lot of millennials and people do these days, with the cell phones and everything, they want everything answers right away. If you opt for that for your health, then what's going to happen is later down the line, you're going to run into a block, and then it's going to be really expensive at that point. So it's better to sort of take care of yourself before any of that happens, and try to get to any minor issues that you have, get rid of them now. It's better to live your life in terms of health that way, as opposed to waiting for it all to crash.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And something that I know about the NAET program and the organization itself is you operate with a high level of integrity, and ethics are really important to you and all of the leaders. And training is also really important. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So basically my mother and I are the ones who are sort of running most of it, to be honest with you, right now. We do have instructors sparse throughout the world that help us, a few instructors here and there, but pretty much my mom and I are the ones who are sort of controlling everything. And we definitely, my mom, that's one of the other things that's really brilliant about her compared to some of her contemporaries, who are looking for to just like a short, kind of gain on something and a quick fix to whatever issue they're dealing with. My mom was really more of a long-term sort of solution person, and doing things sort of under the radar, not getting in anyone's way, like pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies, for example, and doing the research, taking the time to sort of evolve this technique to where we have it now. And that is now we all have the training now, which is actually internet based. It used to be live session, but now we have an internet based training. And she spent a lot of time on that as well. And that we've been doing for that past 6 years or so. And that has been incredible. A lot of people are doing so well. In fact, I would argue the people who are studying the internet training are better practitioners, sort of with the same amount of experience as a person who were to, let's say, start brand new from a live training. Of course, there are many seasoned veterans out there, and they're, of course, very good. But I'm talking about right off the gate. The internet training does prepare practitioners, I think, much better. And so we're evolving too, and we're trying to make sure that all of our practitioners are practicing properly. I'm very strict. If I find out if any of our practitioners are not doing something either ethically or properly or sanctioned by us, I will remove them from our website. I do not recommend them. I've created a lot of enemies, unfortunately, this way, but it is for the benefit of our patients, for the world, for NAET. That's really all I care about. Is I just want to make sure that it does not get sort of banned in the United States or something like that. So that's our main concern, and that's why I was talking about the research. We have a large autism study that we're doing. It's on hold right now due to COVID-19, but once we get back to it, we hope to publish that study at some point in the future. And that would be hopefully a real sort of jumping, board for us to get into maybe insurance and hospitals or something like that. So that's kind of what our goal is.
That's great. And if the focus is on medicine for the people,
yes,
you want to protect that, and you want to really lay a foundation of solid training, ethics, because there's a lot of energy work that can go on that can be versions and compilations of different techniques. But without that commitment to the training and making sure people are mindful of the fact that they're using a technique that needs to be used in a certain way, you can do harm. There's risks. There's lots of things that can happen out there, even with approaches that seem that they're non-invasive.
Right.
It doesn't mean that there can't be some emotional or physical risk if there's not a lot of attention to this. And that being said, I recommend that people go to your website if they're interested in finding a practitioner.
Yes.
And that's a great place to start, and to know that that's coming from a place of good training and credibility. And that's an excellent place to start if people want to explore having some NAET treatments themselves.
Yeah, so the website is www.naet.com. And on there, we have a feature where you can type in your zip code, for example, and find a practitioner near you and all of that. And one of the things I would say, one of the sort of pitfalls to NAET that I have seen over the years is practitioners mixing it with other techniques or doing other things that they think are sort of better maybe, and claiming it as NAET, unfortunately. And what'll happen is it causes harm, unfortunately, for a patient, maybe giving a certain herb or doing a certain chiropractic technique or something, and which the patient doesn't necessarily need. And that's where NAET sort of gets hung up. So the best practitioners are the ones who keep it very simple and do it exactly as told, pretty much. As I said, the most difficult part about NAET is getting to that fundamental reason for why you're sick, essentially, especially if you're an adult. and if you have like complicated issues. Sometimes it's very simple, it's like a child with just a nut allergy and you just have to treat and get through that kind of thing. Even though that can be very complicated too, but at least you know what you're dealing with. But in adults, especially with, as we have been mentioning, emotional issues, there are a lot of like sort of hidden emotions there, and it does take a lot of good sort of muscle testing, which is something that we do with our technique, by the way. It's a sort of the best sort of non-invasive way that my mom found that can sort of clue us into what the body is telling us. There may be other ways to do that, history, asking questions, etc. But or looking at clues in the body. But basically the muscle testing is one of the other sort of big things that we use in NAET. We do some blood work as well for like severe allergies and stuff like this. But for the emotions, that's really the best way.
And I've had some experiences with muscle testing that are pretty funny because I'll be muscle tested for something that I just don't want to be allergic to.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I'm just going to try to hold my arm as strong as I can because no, I
Yeah.
do not want to be allergic to something that I really like.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. That's a good kind of good point. Sometimes it's tough, but if a really good practitioner who has a lot of experience can really get through all those sort of biases and really get good results with testing. But sometimes it can be tricky.
Yeah, and I've had some conversations with some other folks who work in the field of energy medicine. And one thing we've talked about is muscle testing, how powerful it is, but how it's really important for the practitioner to have a clear head and to do the personal work, to not be too biased, because that can influence the process.
Of course, absolutely, well said. Yes, that is probably the key, actually. That I didn't even think about that, but yeah, now that you mention it, said that way is perfect. Mm-hmm.
And that's probably likely why sometimes getting to the answer can be difficult, because the older you are, the more you have this history and things are really interwoven.
Right.
And I know myself as a patient, I feel like I have my own story. I feel like I know exactly what's wrong. And what I love about NAET is that when it's done properly, you have to also get rid of your own story, because your story may not be correct, and that may not be what your body really needs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right, that's true. That has happened many times to many of my patients, where they'll come in saying, this is my issue, and lo and behold, I'll find something else, and the next thing I know, the patient's crying on the table, just shocked at how I figured that out. That has happened many times. So, in fact, I now that I said it, I remember a patient who flew all the way from China to come and see us, and she thought that dust was the cause of her eye rash that she was having for a certain number of months. And she had gone to see everyone, and nothing was helping. And lo and behold, when I got down to sort of the appropriate time to test for things, I found out that she was having an affair with somebody, on her husband. And she just kind of looked at me like I was the devil or something, and didn't know how I got that. She had not told a single soul about it. And it was just incredible. She didn't want to continue with NAT. I think I did one treatment. I don't know what happened to her, but that I remember that experience, because I just realized, wow, how that proved to me how strong muscle testing could be, because I had no idea, and I was just asking certain questions, and I got to this. When I asked her about it, she just kind of blew a fuse. So so things like that happen. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Now, would you say, Dr. Roy, that blood testing for allergy testing is equally important? Is it about the same? I mean, where does that fit in?
It depends on what exactly you're talking about. So, like, if you're talking about generally children, first of all, and number two, severe allergies. In those, so a child with severe allergies, the blood work is really important, because that will tell you if something is in the anaphylactic level. And if it's a really strong medical blood allergy to something, then it's no longer a simple issue of just treating it once or using the muscle testing. You actually have to use that blood level as your target. So in other words, instead of muscle testing, you use the blood level as your target as to what to get down. So you treat it a certain number of times to get that level to 0, for example. It can be very hard and take many years, but that's the general sort of approach. In adults, generally speaking, who have been fine most of their life and just having like a recent issue, number one. And number two, whose blood work may be negative, or actually who do not have severe life-threatening allergies to a food. In those cases, muscle testing is much more important. Because then at that point, it's more of a sensitivity or a reaction or an emotional sort of issue that you're dealing with, as opposed to an antibody-mediated process. In autoimmune patients, however, it's a mix of the two, I would say. They're both important. Blood work is important as well as the muscle testing. So for example, we use the muscle testing to find out what to treat, but we use our endpoint as the blood work. So like, that, for example, in Crohn's, let's say there certain titers of antibodies you can use to sort of say, okay, if your ANA is going down or SED rate, et cetera, you can kind of monitor what you're doing. But at the same time, you do have to muscle test because they have a lot of complicated issues. In children with severe allergies, that's the prototypical case of just pure blood work and just focusing on that to get that down, basically.
Makes sense. But like you're saying, muscle testing can be just as accurate for those who have more of a sensitivity, and there's not that risk of anaphylaxis that you have to watch to be sure that there's, nothing serious can happen as a result of doing the treatment.
Yeah. So what I guess the other way of saying it is in those, so muscle testing is really good in all cases. However, in severe food allergies, the muscle testing will often become strong before the blood work goes down. So then at that point, you have to use the blood work pretty much to call it quits, so to speak. So that's kind of what I'm referring to.
Got it. Definitely. Wow, Dr. Roy. Well, I just appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, and I'm hopeful people will go to your website, look up practitioners. I'm going to have some resources on my website, some of my favorite books that Dr. Devis wrote that are, Say Goodbye to Your Allergies, the book that really changed my life when I opened it up and I said, wow, this book is me. I have nothing to lose. I need to try this. And
that's great. Yeah. And also people can go, and also if anyone is qualified or has some sort of credentialing, they can also take the training course as well. That's also on the website too. But yeah, so those are all on, again, NAET.com.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm deeply grateful to all of you who, provide this technique for us and keep it available to folks like myself. And like I say, I wouldn't be here today. I really, truly believe that had I not found it, and all the practitioners who've been part of my own healing team that have done NAET, on me. I got certified myself just because I wanted to be empowered to be able to self-treat. I don't, treat patients. I've never had a practice, but it was really important for me to understand it further and to be able to feel that I could use it to further my own help. So for those that are interested in training and doing the online programs and everything, I just can't say enough about it. I even know veterinarians who've been certified who use it to treat their pets. And my late Yoshabel had a lot of benefits from having NAET treatments. So,
as my mom says, people's medicine. So we want as many people as possible to know about their own sort of issues. The more that happens, the better our world will be. I mean, we can end wars by doing NAET, and I think, and my mom has actually said that, by the way. So I think, I think everything is connected to this. So I think once we get everyone on board with this, it'll be amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy.
All right. You're welcome. Take care.